This is interesting. We talked about the French connection and the French invasion and French Revolution, NBA. Well, the Foreign Legion's about to take over the National Hockey League. Virtually all the top players who are going to get drafted on Friday in the first round come from Russia. We've never ever seen that before. We've seen Euros. We've seen a lot of really good Scandinavians. We've seen players from the Soviet Iron Curtain countries. But we're talking now at the top of the draft board. It looks as if there's going to be a run on a whole pile of Russian players right from the get-go. San Jose has the number one pick, and they're going to take Max Celebrini, the top college player in the country from Boston University. Scored 30-plus goals last season, was the Hobie Baker Award. He's a really fine player. Of course, San Jose is in the middle of a massive rebuild. They're probably going to put maybe the youngest team on the ice in modern-day NHL hockey. Chicago has the second pick, and of course, last year they got Connor Bedard, the great young center iceman, and played him a lot. He was hurt at midseason. They evidently are going to go get a Russian defenseman by the name of Artyom Levshunov. He's from Michigan State University. He's a really good hockey player, and he's going to be an instant guy that's going to play at age 19. Anaheim Ducks have the third pick, and they've drafted high in the last group of years in this very, very painful rebuild. It looks as if they're going to take a Russian defenseman, big physical guy, Anton Silayev. He's going to get drafted. It's interesting. The Ducks have picks 3, 31, and 35. The Ducks, I think, if memory serves me, have a total of 6 picks in the first, I want to say 79 choices. So there's going to be a plethora of players that the Ducks are going to take. Looks as if they're going to take a Russian defenseman. In fact, the theory is right now that of the first 9 picks in the draft on Friday, 5 of them will be Russian, and maybe as many as 7 of them are going to have European ties. So that draft is really interesting. That's hockey item number 1. Hockey item number 2. This is an amazing story that broke this morning. The Edmonton Oilers, who went to Game 7 of the NHL Stanley Cup Finals and were right there with minutes to go and then wound up losing, fired their general manager this morning, announcing Ken Holland is not going to be offered a contract extension. So that comes away as really a shocking story. Third item, the story just broke about 12 noon today. The Anaheim Ducks are talking to the Detroit Red Wings about doing what I said they should do. Free goaltender John Gibson. They're talking about trading Gibson to the Detroit Red Wings. They had talked prior to the Ottawa Senators. There had been some conversations over the weekend with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and now Detroit seems to be front and center. Problem is Gibson has had a couple of really bad seasons and a bad set of circumstances with a rebuild team. He's got 3 years, almost $19 million of salary. The Ducks are going to have to pay some of that salary to get the Red Wings to take him. I would hope the Ducks wouldn't stockpile more draft picks. They're so young right now. I would hope that if it's going to be Detroit, that they get some veteran players to stabilize the young guys. And if Gibson is traded, he becomes the 5th goaltender to be traded in the last 2 weeks in the NHL. Boston had dealt Linus Ullmark. He wound up going to Ottawa. Joonas Korpisalo went from Ottawa to Boston as part of that payment. The Kings, of course, traded the Pierre-Luc Dubois deal. They wound up sending him to Washington. They got goaltender Darcy Kemper back in that deal. Calgary shipped Jacob Markstrom. He wound up going to the New Jersey Devils for a number 1 draft pick. So if Gibson gets traded, that's going to be the 5th goaltender moved in the last 2 weeks. So really interesting day coming up in the National Hockey League. With the draft, it starts Friday and obviously goes into Saturday, goes Sunday, but everybody will be paying attention to the group of Russians that might be taking over, invading the NHL with top picks in the draft. John?
Lee, what's your understanding of the history of the NHL and taking Soviet or Russian players? Because I'd imagine there was a time where they weren't allowed to come to America or to North America to play in the NHL. I mean, when did all that change?
Mid-1970s. A couple of Russian players defected in the middle of the night, were smuggled through Belgium and into London, England, and then to Canada. And that's where it started. And at that point, there was no relationship between the NHL and the then Soviet Union. They eventually worked a deal, like a Lend-Lease deal, where players could be drafted at a certain age. But it all started with, there was a big center iceman by the name of Vlad Nedemensky, who jumped to Toronto in the World Hockey Association. And he was the first one that really came and had success. And then more defected, and that's what happened. And then that opened the door where suddenly a whole bunch of other Euros saw what was happening with Russian players, and they went to their hockey federations and said, we should have the right to be able to be free and come to the National Hockey League. And then there were agreements that the NHL made with all the different federations, Czechoslovakia, the Latvian countries, then obviously Scandinavia. So, I mean, we have a preponderance of superstars who have come from the European countries. But you just think about that. Under the threat of death, these players left those countries and left their families behind. Just absolutely amazing. And that happened for probably a good 5-year span where guys were defecting and getting helped to get out of the Soviet Union bloc countries to come to the NHL. And then eventually they worked a Lend-Lease deal and the payment transaction deal and things of that nature.
I mean, it's interesting. It's kind of like, Cuban players in baseball. But, one thing I love about all these drafts is how they've turned them into an event. It's a spectacle. So do you think we're going to expect to see the NHL draft being similar to the NBA draft?
Well, the NBA draft this year made it a 2-day draft. First time they've ever done that. The National Football League draft is now a 3-day affair. The NHL, they went to a multi-day presentation about 3 or 4 years ago. So yeah, they've made it an event. They've made it a showcase. They've made it sparkling. This one's going to be in Vegas at the Sphere, starting on Friday afternoon, and it's really become a big event. By the way, speaking of events, let me just throw this number at you, John. NHL Stanley Cup Finals, Game 7, when you were screaming at the TV, Edmonton losing at the last minute to Florida, 7.7 million viewed Game 7 in the U.S. In the U.S.
Wow.
7.8 million viewed it in Canada. That's over 15.5 million viewed Game 7. And the TV ratings for the Stanley Cup Finals, the 7-game series, up 58%. It was just absolutely amazing how suddenly hockey has moved to the front like we've never, ever seen before. So, the NHL right now is in a really good place, almost equally as good as what the NBA playoffs have been. Obviously, what baseball has grown back and bounced back into, though nobody is anywhere near close to what the National Football League does, but 58% increase in TV ratings, all-time record high. That's good for hockey.
Good for hockey, and man, it was Game 7, and these guys are going balls to the wall. Hockey is fantastic. As a newbie fan, I'm loving it. It was a great series, Lee, so I was one of those 15 million or so watching the games.
Okay,